The Dakota Territory was a place that swallowed dreams whole. Esther Hale knew this better than anyone. She was 22, but felt like 100. Her own dream, the one she'd built with Arthur, was now just a plot of dirt on a low hill. A ranch, kids, a life, all of it gone. Snatched away by a fever that didn't care about plans made by lamplight. First Arthur, then their baby boy, who hadn't even had a chance to see a spring thaw. Now, her life was a checklist of survival: haul water, weed beans, check snares, patch roof. Each task was a heavy stone she laid on top of her grief, trying to build a wall so high she couldn't see the past. But the past had a way of seeping through the cracks. It was in the silence of the cabin, a quiet so loud it felt like a physical presence. It was in the way she still woke up, reaching for a man who was now just a memory under the sod. The prairie was beautiful, but it was a cruel kind of beautiful. It didn't care that she was alone. The wind sounded like it was crying for someone, a constant reminder of the hollowness in her own chest. She stayed away from Blackwood Forks, the nearest settlement. The pity in the eyes of the women was like sandpaper on her soul. The looks from the men were worse. They didn't see a grieving widow. They saw an opportunity, a piece of land and a woman to work it. So she stayed away, wrapping her isolation around her like a suit of armor. But armor gets heavy, and food runs out. On a blistering August afternoon, with the air humming from the heat and the drone of cicadas, Esther pushed farther from her cabin than she had in months. The snares had been empty for days. Her stomach ached with a dull craving for fresh meat. She followed the creek, rifle in hand, her boots kicking up clouds of dry dust. She was heading for a rocky outcrop, a jumble of granite that might offer a rabbit some shade. It was there she heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind, wasn't an animal. It was a whimper, a soft, choked little sound. Her hand clenched on the rifle. Her heart, usually a slow, heavy drum, started hammering against her ribs. She moved silently, every sense on high alert. Peeking around a massive boulder, she saw him. A boy, no older than 4. His skin was the color of rich soil, his hair a curtain of straight black silk. He was dressed in deerskin, and he was completely, utterly alone. A lost child. Cold fear shot through her. She knew the stories they whispered in town about the Sioux, the proud, untamed people who still considered this land theirs. But the fear was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by something she thought she'd buried with her own son. A fierce, gut-wrenching need to protect. The boy was crying, his tiny body shaking. He was lost. She lowered the rifle, propping it against the rock. "It's all right," she said, her voice a rusty whisper. She held out her hands, palms up, hoping the gesture meant the same thing in his language. "I won't hurt you." The boy's dark eyes went wide with terror. He scrambled backward, and that single, clumsy movement saved his life. His heel kicked a loose stone, and the world exploded in a dry, menacing rattle. Esther's eyes snapped down. Coiled in the sliver of shade beneath the rock ledge were not 1, but 3 rattlesnakes. A writhing knot of diamond patterns and pure menace. Their heads were up, their black tongues tasting the air, their anger absolute. There was no time to think, no time for the cold, calculated survival that had been her life for the past year. There was only instinct. The snakes were already striking, a blur of motion aimed at the boy's small, bare legs. A cry ripped from her throat as she lunged. She shoved the boy with all her strength, sending him tumbling into the grass, away from the fangs. And in that same instant she felt it, a white-hot, piercing fire in her calf. Then another, sharp as broken glass, just above her ankle. Before she could even scream, a third strike hit high, sinking deep into the flesh below her knee. She cried out, a sound of pure shock and agony, and scrambled away from the furious serpents as they hissed and vanished back into the shadows. Esther collapsed, her hand clutching her leg. The world was already starting to spin. 3 bites. She knew what that meant. It was a death sentence. She looked at her leg. The puncture wounds were already swelling, surrounded by ugly purple rings. A venomous fire was racing through her veins. She glanced at the Lakota boy. He was on his feet, his face a mask of stunned silence. His tears were gone. He was safe. That one thought was a tiny flicker of light in a world that was rapidly going black. She tried to think of Arthur, of her baby, but their faces were fading. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The buzzing of the cicadas became a roar in her ears. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her completely were the boy's huge, terrified eyes staring down at her. Consciousness came back in jagged pieces. Not a gentle sunrise, but a violent assault on her senses. There was heat, a suffocating fever that felt like it was cooking her from the inside. There was pain, a relentless, throbbing fire that consumed her entire leg. There was a desperate, sandpaper thirst, and there were smells, wood smoke, sage, and the unfamiliar animal scent of tanned hides. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt like they were glued shut. With a will she didn't know she had, she forced them open. The light was dim, filtered through a translucent skin stretched above her. This wasn't her cabin. The ceiling was a cone of poles meeting at a smoke hole far above, showing a tiny patch of bruised evening sky. She was in a teepee. Panic, cold and slick, seized her by the throat. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness and searing pain slammed her back down onto a bed of soft buffalo robes. Her head lolled to the side, and her eyes struggled to focus. She was not alone. Shadowy figures sat in a circle around a central fire pit, the embers glowing like watchful red eyes. They were men, broad-shouldered and silent. The flickering light carved their faces into masks of sharp angles and deep shadows. Long, dark braids, some decorated with beads or feathers, framed faces that were impossible to read. Warriors. The word screamed through her mind, a frantic bird beating itself against the cage of her ribs. She was a captive. They'd found her. They'd taken her. A low moan of pure terror escaped her lips. One of the figures stirred, rising with a fluid, silent grace. He was tall, his silhouette against the firelight immense and terrifying. He started moving toward her. She flinched, trying to drag herself away, but her body was a useless, leaden weight. Then, another figure moved. A woman. Her face was a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles. She knelt beside Esther, her touch surprisingly gentle as she laid a cool, damp cloth on her burning forehead. The woman murmured something in a low, musical language. The words meant nothing to Esther, but the tone was as soothing as a lullaby. The healer. The woman's presence was a tiny anchor in an ocean of fear. Esther's gaze darted back to the circle of men. They were all watching her. Their dark eyes were intense, unblinking. But through the haze of her fever, she couldn't see any menace in their expressions. It was something else, a deep, unnerving curiosity, an appraisal that felt ancient and solemn. The tall man now stood at the foot of her bedding. He looked younger than the others, his face stern but not cruel, marked with a quiet authority. He spoke, his voice a low rumble. He pointed at her bandaged leg. Then he made a motion with his hand like he was pushing something away. Then he pointed to a small figure huddled beside him, almost hidden in the folds of his buffalo robe. It was the boy, the Lakota child from the rocks. The boy peered at her, his small face a mixture of awe and guilt. And in her delirious mind, a fragmented understanding began to form. They hadn't captured her. They had found her. The boy had brought them to her. They knew what she had done. The old woman, the healer, offered her a small wooden bowl. The liquid inside was dark and bitter, but Esther was too weak, too thirsty to refuse. She drank, the old woman's steady hand supporting her head. As the potent herbal medicine slid down her throat, her eyelids grew heavy again. The faces of the warriors began to blur, their silent watch seeming to deepen just before sleep pulled her under once more. Just as she was drifting off, the old woman leaned close. She spoke, this time in broken, heavily accented English. "You safe," she whispered. "Boy safe. Because you." She gestured to the silent men. "They see honor. Brave heart." The words were confusing. Honor? All Esther felt was pain and terror. As her vision faded completely to black, the image of those stoic, watching men was burned into her mind. She drifted away on a dark tide, completely unaware of the serious, hushed conversation her brief awakening had started. Unaware that her simple, instinctual act of bravery had sent a shockwave through the heart of this tribe, setting in motion a fate she could never have imagined. And she was utterly, completely unaware that the intense gazes of the men were not those of captors studying a prisoner. They were the gazes of protectors, of providers, beholding what they saw as a miracle. In their world, a woman willing to trade her life for a child of another people wasn't something to be captured. She was something to be cherished, to be protected, to be bound to them forever. The concept was so alien to Esther's world, she wouldn't have believed it even if she'd understood. They weren't debating her fate. They were debating which one of them was worthy enough to claim the honor of taking her as his wife. The days that followed were a blur, a long, painful dream of fever, fitful sleep, and the constant, patient care of the old woman. Her name, Esther learned, was Wee Wee. She was a constant presence, her hands skilled, her voice a low, calming hum that cut through the fog of pain. She cleaned the wounds on Esther's leg with strange-smelling infusions of yarrow and willow bark. She packed them with poultices of chewed herbs that seemed to draw the fire and sickness out of her flesh. Twice, when the swelling grew angry and tight, Wee Wee had to take a sharp flint knife and slice the bites open to release the poison. The agony left Esther drenched in sweat, whimpering like a child. But through it all, Wee Wee's grip was firm, her expression a mix of fierce concentration and deep compassion. Slowly, painstakingly, the terror began to fade. It was worn away by the steady, gentle rhythm of this unexpected care. No one hurt her, no one threatened her. The warriors were a constant, silent presence, but they were no longer inside the teepee. They formed an unspoken perimeter outside. Through the open flap of the teepee, she would catch glimpses of them. A broad shoulder, a stoic profile, the sun glinting off a beaded armband. The tall one was there most often. Chayton. She learned his name from Wee Wee. He was the boy's father. That much she had pieced together from the old woman's broken English and expressive hand gestures. Chayton never came inside the teepee while Wee Wee was working on her, but every morning and every evening he would appear at the entrance. He would just stand there looking at her. It was a long, searching gaze that held a universe of emotion she couldn't begin to understand. Gratitude, she could see that. Respect. But there was something else, too. A profound, solemn weight. He would speak a few quiet words to Wee Wee, place an offering of fresh meat or a bundle of herbs by the door, and then he would leave. He never tried to speak to her. The silence between them was a vast, empty space, yet it felt charged with unspoken meaning. The boy, Kuruk, was her most frequent visitor. At first, he would just peek around the edge of the door flap, his dark eyes wide and full of a child's solemn curiosity. Then, coaxed by Wee Wee, he began to creep inside. He would sit quietly in a corner, just watching her with an unnerving intensity, as if she were some strange creature he was trying to figure out. One day, he timidly approached her bedding. In his small hand, he held a single, slightly crushed prairie wildflower. He laid it gently on the buffalo robe beside her hand. Esther looked from the small purple flower to the boy's earnest face. The gesture was so simple, so pure, it slipped past all the walls she had built around her heart. She felt the hot sting of tears, the first she had shed for anything other than pain since she'd woken up in this strange place. She managed a weak, trembling smile. Kuruk, seeing it, broke into a hesitant smile of his own before scurrying back to his corner. It was the start of a bridge between their two worlds. As the fever finally broke and her mind began to clear, the world of the Lakota camp slowly came into focus. It was a place of constant, quiet work. The sounds of women tanning hides, their scrapers moving in a steady rhythm. The laughter of children playing games she didn't understand. The rhythmic thud of a pestle grinding corn in a mortar. It was a tapestry of life, vibrant and whole. It was everything her silent, empty cabin was not. Her appetite returned with a vengeance. Wee Wee brought her savory broths that tasted of wild herbs and tender pieces of roasted bison. The food was strange to her, but it was deeply nourishing. With every meal, she felt a little more strength seeping back into her bones. Soon she could sit up, propped against a backrest of woven willows. From there, she watched the life of Wee Wee's teepee, which served as both home and infirmary. One afternoon, she was listlessly running her fingers over a mended tear in her own sleeve when an idea sparked. She gestured for Wee Wee to come closer. She pointed to a small rip in Kuruk's tunic, then mimed the act of sewing. Wee Wee watched, her head tilted, then nodded slowly. She rummaged in a painted leather bag and produced a sharp bone awl and a strand of sinew. Esther shook her head gently. She patted the small leather pouch that still hung at her belt, which they had left completely untouched. With clumsy, weak fingers, she opened it and pulled out her small sewing kit. It was a precious remnant of her old life, with fine steel needles and spools of cotton thread. Wee Wee's eyes widened in amazement at the delicate, shiny needle. Esther took Kuruk's tunic, and, with the small, precise stitches her mother had taught her, she repaired the tear until the seam was nearly invisible. When she was finished, she handed it back to the boy. He stared at the neat, straight line of thread, then looked up at her, his face a mask of pure wonder. He ran his small finger over the smooth seam again and again. Chayton arrived for his evening visit, just as Kuruk was excitedly showing the mended tunic to Wee Wee. The boy ran to his father, chattering in his own language, pointing from the tunic to Esther. Chayton took the small garment from his son. His long, strong fingers examined her handiwork, tracing the line of perfect, tiny stitches. Then his gaze rose to meet hers, and for the first time, the stern mask of his authority slipped. A flicker of something soft, something like wonder, moved in his dark eyes. He said something to her, the first words he had ever spoken directly to her. Wee Wee translated, her voice soft with a smile. He says you have magic in your fingers, like the spider who weaves a strong web. Esther felt a hot blush creep up her neck. It was such a strange, poetic compliment. "It is just sewing," she whispered, her voice still raspy. "It is a gift," Wee Wee corrected her gently. That night, the strange conversation she'd had with Wee Wee in her fever came rushing back to her. The part about the warriors, the part about marriage. She had been stronger for a few days now, and she'd asked the old woman to explain what she had meant. Wee Wee had struggled, her English not quite enough to capture the complex idea. It wasn't a demand, she had explained. It was a statement of worth. In their culture, a person's value was measured by their courage and their contribution to the people. By saving the son of a leader, by offering her own life without a second thought for a child who was not her own, she had shown a bravery so profound it placed her on a different level in their eyes. The desire of the men to marry her was their way of showing the highest possible respect. It was their way of saying, "You are one of us now. You are worthy of our protection, our name, a place in our family." They wanted to bind her to them, to make sure a woman with such a strong heart would never be lost to them. The idea was still overwhelming, alien to her very core. To her, marriage was a union of love, of shared dreams. It was the memory of Arthur's hand in hers. To them, it seemed to be a social contract, an agreement of honor and protection. She looked at Chaitan, at the quiet dignity that seemed to surround him like a cloak, and felt a deep, profound confusion. He was a widower, too. Wee had told her that. Kuruk's mother had been taken by the coughing sickness 2 winters ago. They were both adrift, scarred by loss. The thought created another small, fragile connection in the vast silence between them. A week later, Esther took her first steps. Leaning heavily on a walking staff that Chaitan himself had carved for her, she hobbled out of the teepee and into the bright, clear sunlight. The entire camp seemed to fall silent. Every single eye turned to her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her pale skin and faded calico dress a stark contrast to the earthy tones all around her. But she saw no hostility in their gazes, only a quiet, respectful curiosity. Chaitan stood a short distance away, watching her, his arms crossed over his broad chest. Kuruk ran to her side, grabbing her free hand as if to steady her. As she stood there, blinking in the sun, her legs trembling in protest, she felt it for the very first time. A tentative, fragile sense of belonging. She wasn't just the strange white woman anymore. She was the woman who had been saved. The woman who had saved the boy. The woman with the strong heart. Whether she had chosen it or not, she was a part of their story now. And the thought was no longer terrifying. To her own surprise, it was starting to feel like a strange, unexpected grace. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. Autumn arrived, painting the cottonwoods along the riverbanks in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. Esther's leg healed, but it left a permanent reminder. 3 puckered star-shaped scars marked her calf and shin, a testament to the exact moment her life had shattered and then been remade into something new. She could walk without the staff now, though a slight limp remained, a subtle ache that grew more pronounced when she was tired or when the cold wind blew from the north. She had found a rhythm here, in the heart of the Lakota camp. She was no longer an invalid, but a quiet, accepted member of the community. She lived in Wee's teepee, helping the old woman with her endless tasks.
She learned to gather herbs, to grind corn with a heavy stone, to scrape hides with an obsidian tool that felt clumsy and foreign in her hand at first, but slowly became an extension of her own. In return for her work and Wee's patient lessons in the Lakota language, Esther contributed her own unique skills. Her steel needles were a source of endless fascination. She spent many afternoons mending garments, her fingers flying with a speed and precision that drew quiet, admiring glances from the other women. She was learning their world, one day at a time. She learned which roots were for healing and which were for dye. She learned the cadence of their language, the soft vowels and guttural stops, picking up words and phrases like smooth, worn stones from a riverbed. She learned about the complex web of kinship that bound them all together, a stark, shocking contrast to the brutal isolation that had defined her own life for so long. Here, no one was ever truly alone. Her relationship with Chaitan remained one of profound, respectful distance. Yet, it deepened with every shared silence, every fleeting glance across the flickering light of the evening fire. He was the leader of his warrior society, a man who carried the weight of his people with a quiet, unyielding strength. She saw the way the other men looked to him, the deference in their posture, the respect in their voices when they spoke his name. But with his son, and with her, he was different. When he watched Kuruk play, a softness would gentle the hard lines of his face. And when he looked at Esther, his dark eyes held a question that he never allowed his lips to speak. He continued his daily ritual of bringing offerings. Not just the practical gifts of meat for Wee's lodge, but small things for Esther herself. a perfect, iridescent goose feather, the deep blue wing of a jay, a piece of translucent agate, polished smooth by the river. They were never grand gifts, but small, considered things, each one a silent word in the conversation they were having without speaking. She would accept them with a quiet, Pilamaya, a thank you, and he would nod, the ghost of a smile touching his lips before he turned and walked away. The world of Blackwood Forks, of her cold cabin, of Arthur, began to feel like a story from another lifetime, about another person. But she knew, with a cold certainty that sometimes settled in her stomach, that she couldn't stay here forever. She was a white woman, an outsider. Sooner or later, this fragile peace she had found would be broken. The thought of returning to her empty cabin, to the crushing silence and the pitying eyes of the townspeople, was unbearable. She had found something here. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was a sense of purpose, of connection, that she thought had been lost to her forever. The break came sooner than she expected, and it came from the direction she feared the most. One crisp morning, a shout went up from the edge of the camp. 2 riders were approaching. They weren't hunters. They were not Lakota. They were white men. A ripple of tension spread through the camp like a cold wind. Men appeared from their teepees, collecting their rifles and bows not with aggression, but with a weary, practiced readiness. Women gathered their children close, their faces suddenly taut with anxiety. Esther felt a familiar cold dread wash over her. She knew with a sickening certainty who they were and why they had come. She stood beside Wee Wee near the center of the camp, Kuruk clutching her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. Chaitan and a dozen other warriors walked to the edge of the encampment to meet the riders. Their posture was unwelcoming, their faces carved from stone. The lead rider was a man she recognized with a lurch of her stomach. Garrett Donovan, a deputy from Blackwood Forks. A man whose ambition was as plain as the thick neck that bulged over his collar and the perpetual sneer on his lips. The man beside him was a land agent she'd seen once or twice, his face pinched with a sour disdain for everything around him. "We're looking for a woman," Donovan called out, his voice loud and arrogant, making no attempt at civility. "Esther Hale, a widow. We got reason to believe you're holding her against her will." Chayton didn't reply. He simply stood there, a silent, immovable barrier. His stillness was more intimidating than any spoken threat. "Don't play dumb with me," Donovan spat, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his pistol. "We know she's in here. Send her out now, and this can all end peaceful-like." The air grew thick, humming with the promise of violence. Esther knew this was it. This was the moment of decision. Her past had ridden into her present, and it was demanding that she choose a side. She could stay hidden, let these men of stone and iron clash, and watch this fragile peace be shattered all because of her. Or she could face them. She squeezed Kuruk's hand gently and then released it. "I must go," she said to Wee Wee in her halting Lakota. Wee Wee's eyes were filled with worry, but she simply nodded. "Your heart is strong," she said. "Show them." Taking a deep, steadying breath, Esther stepped out from behind the teepee. She walked forward, her limp more pronounced under the stress, but her head was held high. She moved through the line of silent warriors until she stood just behind Chayton's shoulder. Donovan's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in a smirk of triumph. "There she is. See? Told you. Mrs. Hale, are you all right? Have these savages harmed you?" At the insult, every muscle in Chayton's body went rigid. Esther saw the knuckles of his hand clench into a white fist. Without thinking, she reached out and put a light hand on his arm. It was a gesture of restraint, astonishingly bold and deeply intimate. He didn't shrug her off. He stood his ground, but the immediate violent tension in his body eased slightly. Esther looked directly at Garrett Donovan, her gaze clear and cold as a winter stream. "I have not been harmed, Mr. Donovan," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried with absolute clarity in the tense silence. And these people are not savages. Donovan's face flushed a blotchy red, a mixture of anger and confusion. What in God's name are you talking about? You've been missing for months. We assumed you'd been taken. You assumed wrong, Esther said, her voice gaining strength with every word. I was lost. I would have died if not for them. I was bitten by 3 rattlesnakes. She gestured down to her scarred leg. These people found me. They saved my life. The deputy stared at her, his simple, heroic narrative completely unraveling before his eyes. Bitten? 3 times? But you should be. That's impossible. It is the truth, she said firmly. I owe them my life. I am not a prisoner here. I am a guest. A guest? The land agent beside Donovan sneered, looking her up and down with disgust. Living in a teepee like one of them? Have you lost your mind, woman? I have found it, Esther countered, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. I have found more kindness and honor here in this camp than I ever found in Blackwood Forks. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Donovan was completely flustered, his authority crumbling. He had ridden in expecting to be the hero, to rescue the helpless white widow from the clutches of the natives. It was a story that would have served his political ambitions perfectly, reinforcing every prejudice the town held dear. Instead, he was being publicly rebuked by the very woman he'd come to save. This is unnatural, he stammered, searching for some solid ground. You're a white woman, a Christian woman. Your place is with your own kind. You will come with us now. It was not a request. It was an order. This was the precipice. Esther felt Chetan's presence behind her, solid and unwavering as a mountain. She felt the eyes of the entire camp on her back, a silent, waiting audience. She thought of her cold, empty cabin, a tomb filled with ghosts. She thought of the silence, the grief, the crushing loneliness. Then she thought of Wee Wee's gentle hands, of Kuruk's trusting smile, of Chetan's quiet, steady respect. She knew where she belonged. She took a step forward, away from the protection of Chetan's shadow, and stood fully on her own 2 feet. Her gaze never wavered from Donovan's. No, she said. The word was simple, absolute, a closed door. My place is where I'm treated with respect. My place is where a child's life is valued. Then she delivered the final blow. My home is here. The finality in her voice was like a physical strike. Donovan and the agent stared at her, their faces a mask of disbelief and pure fury. She hadn't just refused their rescue. She had chosen the Lakota over them. She had willingly crossed a line they considered sacred, impossible. In their eyes, she had betrayed her race, her society, her entire world. Chetan stepped up to stand beside her. His hand moved from his weapon to rest lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of ownership. It was a gesture of solidarity. A silent, powerful declaration that echoed her own words. She belongs with us. She is one of us. The 2 of them stood there together, a portrait of defiance. The pale, determined woman in her mended calico dress, and the tall, unyielding Lakota leader. They were a bridge between 2 worlds, standing firm against the tide that was trying to tear them apart. Garrett Donovan opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing more to say.
He couldn't force her to leave without starting a battle he wasn't prepared for, a battle for which he now had absolutely no justification. The woman was not a captive. He had been made a fool, his face twisted into a mask of impotent rage. You'll regret this, Mrs. Hale, he hissed, his voice low and venomous. You've made your bed. Don't come crawling back to us when they turn on you. With a savage jerk on his horse's reins, he wheeled the animal around. The land agent, looking profoundly uncomfortable, scrambled to follow. They galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and bitter, ringing silence in their wake. They did not look back. For a long moment after they were gone, no one moved. The tension slowly drained out of the air, replaced by a profound sense of relief and something new, something victorious. Esther felt a tremor run through her body, the delayed shock of the confrontation. Her legs felt weak, and she leaned more heavily against Chayton. His hand tightened on her shoulder, his strength flowing into her, steadying her. Then, a cheer erupted from the assembled Lakota. It wasn't the wild, savage cry the men from Blackwood Forks might have imagined. It was a deep, rolling sound of communal joy and approval. The women began to smile, their faces breaking into warm, relieved expressions. Wee Wee came forward, her old eyes shining with pride, and embraced Esther in a fierce, tight hug. "Your heart is a lion's heart," the old woman whispered in her ear. When Wee Wee pulled back, Esther's eyes met Chayton's. The last barrier between them, the last shred of doubt and uncertainty, had been burned away in the fire of that confrontation. In his gaze, she no longer saw just respect and gratitude. She saw a future. She saw a home. She saw the quiet, steady promise of a shared life. He didn't speak the question that had hung in the air between them for months. He didn't need to. His eyes asked it for him. "Will you stay? Will you be my wife, the mother of my son, a part of my people?" Esther looked at his strong, earnest face. She looked at Kuruk, who was now clinging to her other hand, beaming up at her as if she had single-handedly held back the ocean. She looked around at the circle of teepees, at the smoke curling into the vast blue sky, at the faces of the people who had saved her, healed her, and accepted her. Her old life was a ghost. Her cabin on the prairie was a tomb of memory. This, right here, was life. It was vibrant. It was real. And it was hers, if she was brave enough to claim it. A slow smile spread across her face. The first truly joyful smile she had felt in years. It was a smile that reached her eyes, lighting them from within. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Yes. Chetan's stern facade finally broke completely, replaced by a smile so warm and genuine it transformed his entire face. He took her hand, his large, calloused palm enveloping hers. It felt strong. It felt right. It felt like coming home. In the months that followed, Esther Hale became Esther Hale Chayton, though names meant less here than actions. Her home was no longer a lonely cabin filled with ghosts, but a warm, spacious teepee filled with the sounds of a family. She learned to tan hides until they were as supple as cloth, to cook bison stew over an open fire, and to speak the Lakota language with a fluency that surprised everyone, most of all herself. She taught Kuruk his letters, drawing them in the dirt with a stick, and he, in turn, taught her the names of the star constellations that glittered like diamond dust in the immense dark sky. She never forgot Arthur, or the child she had lost. Their memory was a part of her, a quiet room in the house of her heart that she could visit when she needed to. But it was no longer the only room. Chayton, with his quiet strength and profound gentleness, and Kuruk, with his infectious laughter and unconditional love, had built new rooms, rooms filled with light and warmth and the promise of tomorrow. Sometimes, when she looked down at the 3 faint, star-shaped scars on her leg, she would marvel at the strange, winding path her life had taken. A single, unthinking act of instinct, a lunge to save a frightened child, had unmade her world, only to remake it into something richer and more beautiful than she could ever have dreamed. She had come to the prairie seeking a future, and had found only grief. And then, in a moment of terror and sacrifice, she had found everything she had lost, and so much more. A purpose, a family. A love born not of plans and promises, but of courage and an unexpected, life-altering kindness. The land was no longer an indifferent expanse. It was the heart of her world, and she was, at long last, truly home.
If you were moved by Esther's story of finding a home in the most unexpected of places, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, because you won't want to miss the next story we have coming your way.